Good evening, everyone. Today we'll be discussing on a very common, still with a lot of disbeliefs and myths, the low back pain. So myself, Dr. Rajdeep Singh Bagga, is working as a spine consultant in Bombay Hospital, Indore. So we'll just brief you slightly on low back pain and how to approach these kind of patients and what will be a good management for these kind of chronic patients. So first 15 minutes, there will be a didactic session, which will include epidemiology, anatomy, and pathophysiology of low back pain, followed by an interactive session with other of my colleagues, like approach to patient, what are the red, yellow flags in these patients, when and what to investigate, role of conservative treatment, and who needs surgery. Going to the background, low back pain is like a tooth decay or a common cold. It's very common and nobody is immune to this condition nor its potential disability, nor it discriminates by gender, age, race, or culture. And it is the leading cause for disability and cost of treatment worldwide. So our goal through this presentation is to help clinicians determine the cause of back pain in a substantial proportion of patients, to identify conditions likely to lead serious disability if not treated promptly, reduce the symptoms for back pain for our patients, and increase functional capacity and reduce the likelihood of recurrences. So talking about epidemiology, a low back pain is most prevalent between the age of 35 to 55 years of age, and number of surveys in multiple countries reveal a point prevalence of 70 to 30%. That means prevalence of 43%, which means prevalence of 60 to 80%. Which means patient had an episode in his lifetime when the survey was done. At age of 40, females are slightly predominant compared to males, which become again predominant at more than 50 years of age. Talking about recurrences, 14% of the adult population had an episode of back pain each year that lasted 30 days or longer and at some point interfered with sleep, routine activities, or work. Approximately 1% of the population is permanently disabled by back pain at any given point, and another 1 to 2% are temporarily disabled from their normal occupation. Children are also not spared of this. 5% of children have a history of back pain that interferes with their activities, and 27% report a back pain at some point of their life. Another 1/3 of low back pain patients can suffer from episodes of sciatica, and peak incidence is usually at third and fourth decade. So in India, according to the ICMR report, among Indians, the years lived with disabilities due to low back pain is about 8%. And years lived with disability for low back pain ranked second place in empowered action group states in 2016, like in UP, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh. A low back pain disorder was ranked 20th in 1990, which has shifted to 12th in 2016 compared to all diseases. The treatment rate in women is 8% lower as compared to men, but men delayed their treatment more than often. As you can see in this chart, from 1990 to 2016, there was steep rise from 1.9% to 2.7% in Delhi.
Sorry, Rajdeep, we are not able to see you. Do you want to share your screen?
I'm sharing my screen.
No. Are you? Can others see his screen?
Yes, sir, it is visible. Both in
it's visible. It's visible.
It's visible.
Okay. Okay, carry on.
In viewer also it is visible.
Yeah, so talking about the risk factors, the most common are the frequent driving, weightlifting, and sedentary occupation, followed by chronic cough, smoking, pregnancy, sports involving torsional movements, and familial factors predominating over the environmental factors. Considering the occupation, the heavier the occupations like construction and mining have a higher claims per 100 workers compared to the people who have sedentary works. So what is the natural history of low back pain? Most of the patients relate their back pain associated with a history of a trauma or a sudden jerk or sudden lifting of heavy weight. But a study by Surya et al. In Spine Journal has noticed that 62% doesn't have any cause, not traumatic. Only 8% of these patients have a physical trauma or lifting episode. Most of these patients improve without surgery by 6 weeks. And rate of progressive neurological compromise. Patients are very scared if they have a persistent low back pain on and off, their fear of getting paralysis in future. But what they have found over the period of 2 years, 15 patients have developed neurological deficit. And 14 out of 15 herniated nucleus pulposus has resolved at the end of 24 months. So considering the anatomical background, the spine is supported anteriorly by the abdominal muscles and posteriorly by the sacrospinalis, like the forestays and sternstay of the ship. And the crisscross bracing of the muscles controls the mast. Muscles of the spine are usually arranged from medially in lateral direction by the multifidus, the longissimus, and the iliocostalis. And considering the Mickey Mouse ears around the vertebral bodies are the psoas major. Consider the bony anatomy. It's anterior segment and the posterior segments. Anteriorly, it is the vertebral body joined by a pedicle, and posteriorly the superior and inferior facet and the transverse process followed by the spinous process. Interconnecting both the vertebral body is the intervertebral disc. So intervertebral disc and both the facet joints forms the triple joint complex for the spine. And facet capsules are more pain sensitive and the annulus of the vertebral disc. So as you can see, balance cartilage forms the center and the epiphyseal ring is there, which forms the part of the end plate. And these are anteriorly supported by the anterior longitudinal ligament and the posterior longitudinal ligament and an interlaminar ligamentum flavum. As you can see in the cut section, you can see the nucleus pulposus in the centers and the annulus fibrosus containing it in the periphery. Considering the anatomy of the intervertebral disc, there is the nucleus pulposus in the centers and surrounded by annulus fibrosus. Annulus fibrosus are much thicker and more in quantity anteriorly compared to posteriorly, and the posterior longitudinal ligament is much deficient as we grow from L1 to S1. So it is very weak at L4-5 and 5S1 level, which is the most common site for disc herniation. As nucleus pulposus gets vertically depressed, it causes hoop stress as in a barrel. And the annulus fibers are arranged in 3 layers in a crisscross fashion. So according to the wear and tear which is happening at the annulus fibrosus level, there are different types of spurs what we see in the x-rays, like traction spurs or McNabb spurs and the claw osteophytes. The claw osteophytes are occurring ossifications at the level of the fibers attaching the epiphyseal ring to the other epiphyseal ring, whereas the traction spurs forms 1 to 2 millimeters away from the end plates, which are signs of instability. The one more pathology which is noticed in routine x-rays, which can be associated to low back pain by many patients, is the Schmoll's nodes. Schmoll's nodes are nothing but like deficient hyaline cartilage from where the disc nucleus pulposus presents as continuous pressure over the epiphyseal cartilage and causes indenting of the decreased blood supply and indenting in the end plate. So it's a famous Dr. Nicholson found interdiscal pressure in various positions in human body. They found that lying down position, the interdiscal pressure is the minimum compared to bending forward, which is the maximum. The other supports of the spine posteriorly are the supra and the interspinous ligaments. As you can see, that limits extreme of forward flexion and extension. Extreme of forward flexions is limited by these ligaments, hence preventing overloading of the posterior facet joints. Considering the nerve supply of the intervertebral disc, it is usually supplied by the sinovertebral nerves arising from the dorsal root ganglion, which supplies the periphery of the annulus fibrosus. The central part of the disc is avascular and is not supplied by any nerves. In a study, it was found that pain-sensitive structure in awake spine surgery patients, facetal capsules and the annulus are the only pain-sensitive structures during the surgery. Rest all are relatively in. So what is the pathophysiology? Back pain does only come from the spine pathology. It has a psychosocial component and the work components also. At a cellular level, there is an inflammation of posterior joints of the spine, the intervertebral disc or the ligaments, muscle, meninges or the nerve roots, releasing bradykinin, prostaglandins and leukotrienes, which activates nerve endings and generate nerve impulse that travel to the spinal cord. Nociceptive nerves in turn release neuropeptides like substance P, which act on blood vessels, causing extravasation and stimulating mast cells to release histamines, dilate blood vessels, and causes inflammation and further stimulation of the painful nerve endings. So anterior fibers coming from the innervating from the extremity, posterior fibers coming from the dorsal column. These impulses converge on neurons that also receive input from other sensory receptors. So they act in 4 ways. The first is the change in degree of pain sensation, that is gate control system. The second is the brain release of endorphins, which function as natural analgesics. And brain can also block or enhance the pain response by means of descending serotonergic modulating pathways, impact psychosocial factors on response to pain and disability associated with back pain. And the other method is plasticity. Many patients develop chronic pain that is more widespread than the pathological lesion and continues after the resolution of peripheral inflammatory process. So this is a simplified diagram of neurophysiological pathway of neurotransmitters. As we already discussed, the pain generators in the spine like muscles and disc release bradykinin, which is through the stimulation of the nerve endings, goes to the spinal cord, further stimulate mast cells, and the cycle goes on, and these relay the signals to the brain, and serotonin pathways and other pathways acts through the gate control methods and the psychosocial factors. So at a macro level, with increasing age, water and collagen content of the disc decreases, results in clefts and fissures forming in the annular fibers, leading to disc herniations. So as you can see, it's a grading of Firman. So grade 1 is completely normal disc, which as the degeneration continues. In grade 5, it is a complete collapse and adjacent vertebral bodies have collapsed. So usually in macro level, it goes, as Kirkcaldy-Willis hypothesis, it goes by instability and stability. So as there is a complete collapse of disc space, it possesses a lot of pressure over the posterior facet joints, which leads to a stage of dysfunction, followed by a stage of instability, a lot of vacuum signs and osteophytes you can see, and a zone of instability. You can see a lot of instability stage to a stabilization phase. So how to approach these patients? So we'll be discussing some case scenarios. So these are the 3 cases which we'll be discussing. So first case is a 55-year-old male with low back pain for 1 week, known case of diabetes mellitus, difficulty in getting out of the bed and log roll on, and no other finding. Patient has already tried some analgesics. And a second case of a 32-year-old female with low back pain for 3 months, disturbed sleep due to pain, occasionally going on sides and relieved by NSAIDs. And this 11-year-old child with low back pain for 6 months, increased pain after playing and no radicular system. Dr. Abhinav, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I'm here.
Can you comment how will you go ahead or approach these kind of patients?
Okay, so the first
Case number 1. Yeah, case number 1.
So case number 1 is a 55-year-old man with low back pain for 1 week, and is known case of diabetes mellitus. So in this case, first I'll take a detailed history and of the kind of pain and how did it started and is it progressive or not. And since the pain is of just 1 week, very acute duration, I would like to observe the patient on simple analgesics for few days, and then if the pain continues, I would go for an X-ray and further investigation.
Yeah. What you will do for the second patient, sir?
The second patient, 32-year-old female with lower back pain for 3 months and disturbed sleep due to pain, which occasionally is going on the sides and relieved by NSAIDs. So it gives the indications towards disturbed sleep, and it's relieved by NSAIDs, giving a little bit of indication toward osteoid osteoma. So I would like to get an X-ray done and a CT scan done in this patient. And then there's 11-month-old child, low back pain for 6 months, and pain is increased. 11-year child. Pain increases while playing with no radical symptoms. And since the pain is for a very chronic period, I would like to get get him investigated, and first I will ask for a LS spine, 2 views of LS spine on X-ray and then a CT scan.
Okay, so rightly said. So this first gentleman had an episode of difficulty in getting off the bed. So these are some typical signs which says the patient has an instability type of back pain. So this and patient is a known case of diabetes mellitus, a case of immunosuppression. So it's obviously some red flags we have to pick. Similarly, is this lady due to disturbed sleep, due to pain and relieved by NSAIDs, there is a night pain. So again, it's a red flag. And a child itself, extremes of age is a red flag. So in the first case, there was a spondylodiscitis, can be easily mixed on an X-ray. And second lady has osteoid osteoma, which had a night pain. You can see the hyperintensity is at the pedicle at the left side. The child, the X-rays were absolutely normal. So it was kind of a bullying he got during the playing. So it was a change of the class. The patient was happy. There was no exact cause of back pain in that children. So first important thing is what are the types of back pain. We have to come at spondylogenic or neurogenic. So first you have to rule out viscerogenic or a vascular psychogenic back pain. A viscerogenic is not activity related, patient wrists around the bed and some visceral related symptoms. Whereas vascular, they mimic spinal stenosis but are not activity. And psychologic, here the yellow facts you have to be aware, which we'll discuss. Spondylogenic or neurogenic pain. The spondylogenic pain which arises from a spinal column, disc, ligaments, or muscles or sacroiliac joints, which are activity and relieved by rest. And neurogenic are radiating or referred pain to one or both lower limb with a root tension sign positive and numbness or pinprick sensation. What are the alerts? Alert for juveniles and adolescents is infection, tumor, Sherman's disease, or spondylolysis. In young adults is a spondyloarthropathy with traumatic fractures. alerts for the middle age, around 40 to 65 years of age, is the disc degeneration, and older age groups has the same problems like compression fractures, tumors, or infections. So what we usually do, we usually place back pain in different boxes. Patient having back pain associated with mechanical box. So mechanical box constitutes patient have a positional pain. Patient develops pain after activity, relieved by rest, no radiating features, no red flags, nothing. A second group box is the instability of the back pains. Like in the first patient develops pain while getting up. It's a typical history these patients give is they have a pain getting out of the bed in the morning. They are not able to get out of the bed. They take 5 to 10 minutes just to get out of the bed. The other finding is patients find it very difficult to log roll in the bed in the night. After sitting for a longer time, it's difficult for them to get up. So it's a kind of instability. So it's like there is a segmental instability in the spine, which is causing a lot of paraspinal muscle spasm and pain in these patients. The third box is the radiating. Patient having back pain associated with radicular pain, usually seen in herniated nucleus pulposus. The fourth box is the claudication. These patients have claudications. A neuroclaudications, it does not have a typical pain. They usually have heaviness in the lower limb, tingling or burning in the lower limbs. Pain is very minimal in these patients. If pain is associated, we have to think of other causes also. In vascular claudications, the patient have frequently progressive decrease in walking distance, and they find relief in symptoms after standing. But in neuroclaudication, patient has to sit or forward flex to cause decrease the compression over the nerves and walk forward. These patients find much comfortable walking uphill than downhill. Fifth box is the patients with red or yellow flags. So as we generally discuss, the discogenic or the mechanical type of back pain is aggravated by activity, staying in one position, standing, can be associated with radicular pain. A spondylitis, that is instability of pain, that can aggravate with activities, extension activities, and rarely radiating. A tumor infection usually have a rest pain or night pain with fever, chills, or constitutional symptoms. So what are the red flags? We initially go for X-rays, or these patients are in that category, are usually the extremes of age, like less than 20, more than 55 years, a recent history of trauma, a constant progressive pain not associated with movement, a thoracic pain, past history of malignancy, immunosuppression or HIV, recurrent or prolonged episodes use of steroids, substance misuse, being systemically unwell, unexplained weight loss, neurological deficits, and structural deformities of the spine. Yellow flags are usually the psychological factors. These are the psychological barriers that inhibit recovery from back pain. It is inaccurate perception of the patients for back pains, like belief that back pain is harmful and disabling, belief that passive activity such as bed rest is better than staying active, lack of support at home and social isolation, mental health problems like depression, anxiety, distress, claims for compensation and benefits. So first thing the patient comes to your OPD is to assess the gait. So there's a most common terminology what is recently being used is the hip spine syndrome or the knee spine syndrome. So patients having bilateral severe osteoarthritis knee or patient have hip arthritis usually have a secondary changes in the spine leading to back pain. And once the hip or knee pathology has been addressed, the back pain automatically goes off. So it's very important these kind of patients to assess. Myelopathic. Patient have a subtle myelopathic signs or myelopathic gait has to be looked for. We have seen frequently in patients with myelopathy to develop a lot of back spasm and chronic back pain with no actual symptoms on X-rays or MRI. Use of stick or use of braces suggests that patient has already having instability type of back pain and patient is using support to avoid that lot of movement at the spine. A high stepping gait constitutes patient has a neurological deficit, foot drop or elbow. Walking with tilt. Patient with scoliosis, which are coronally decompensated, or with herniated disc nucleus pulposus, will have a significant tilt while walking, which is easily visible. A stooping gait. Usually, a patient with very severe stenosis will have a stooping gait, but normally, patient with mild or moderate stenosis will walk normally, but they will give a history of getting stoop after some time of walking. An external support and braces also indicate some instability patient is suffering from. And look for the attitude alignment, like patient with ankylosing spondylitis has a completely stiff spine with a dropping head, and patient with a prolapsed disc, if you can see, is a complete tilt has shifted the body on the opposite side. So a tilt also you can give an idea of where the prolapse herniated pulposus is. If the disc is prolapsed onto the shoulder of the nerve root, the patient will deviate onto the opposite side of the disc herniation. If the disc is herniated in the axilla of the nerve root, the patient will deviate on the same side of the disc herniation. So as you can see, this patient, there is a herniated nucleus pulposus which compresses nerves, and patient gives a typical history of relief when they lie down on the floor with the foot resting on the sofa or the stool. Look at the sagittal and the coronal malalignment. Like in scoliosis patient, there is a completely shift in the coronal plane, and in sagittal plane with high-grade listhesis, there is prominence of the buttocks and flexed. On local examinations, look for paraspinal muscles. It will be patients with hyperlordosis will have bilateral paraspinal muscle spasm present in unilateral herniated disc pulposus. Unilateral paraspinal muscle spasm will be seen. Patients with high-grade listhesis and thin patients, it will be easier in spondylolisthesis patients to see a visible step. A local swelling can indicate if there is cold abscess or a posterior element tumor arising. A tenderness, a superficial, a deep tenderness, and a rotational tenderness is to be checked. Along with the movements, ask for forward flexion and check for fingertip to floor distance. Along with that, when the patient flexion, you can keep a hand over the lower lumbar spine and see the spinal spaces separating. So it is very typical, a Schober test is very typical of sacroiliitis, which is typically seen in ankylosing spondylitis. So forward flexion will be limited. There won't be so much excursion at the lumbar spine. Look for side bending and rotation, which is quite minimal in lumbar spine. When the patient is coming from forward flex position to straight, see for the spinal rhythm. So there is a reversal spinal rhythm seen typical in stability when the patient will bend the knees and tuck the pelvis underneath the pelvis to stand erect. This type of movement is very characteristic of segmental instability. Look for the nerve root stretch test. The straight leg raising time is the most common, and the cross straight leg raising test. If you ask the patient to keep the knees straight and passively ask straight leg raising, if the patient complains of pain in range of 30 to 70 degrees, the SLR is considered to be just tensioning of the nerve root, and beyond 70, and SLR complains the pain probably could be due to axillary disc. A femoral nerve stretch will give, it is done L4 nerve root lesions in prone position. Test for sacroiliac joints. This is done a Gansler's test. So in figure of Froh test or Patrick test or pelvic compression dissection test can be done to assess sacroiliac joint function. A tensor fascia letter tightness, they act by rotating the pelvis anteriorly and produce hyperextension of lumbar spine, leading to overloading of the posterior facets and pain. Similarly, both leg raising, which is also causes hyperextension at the spine and overloading of the posterior facet, is also a good test to know the segmental instability. Going for the neurological examination, so for the dermatomes at L1, 2, 3, and L4, L5, and S1, do a motor examination by asking the patient to walk on the toes and the heels to look for the L5 and the S1 lesions. These are the potential findings in root lesions in L4, L5, and S1. At L4, there will be a knee extension weakness with medial to knee sensory loss, and knee reflexes will be reduced, and there is wasting of the thigh muscles. In L5, there is a extensor hallucis longus will be weak, followed by there is numbness over the dorsum of the foot, and tibialis posterior reflex, which is difficult to elicit, is reflex, and the calf is atrophied. Whereas in S1, there is ankle plantar flexions, which is weaker, and later border of the foot and posterior calf muscles. And ankle reflex is diminished with wasting of the calf muscles. So seeing all these patients, examining all the way, you should also keep in mind what are the non-organic components of back pain, like the yellow flags. So usually these kind of patients have symptoms which is multifocal, non-mechanical, extremity is painful, numb or weak, extremity gives way, a treatment response, which is no response, patient that often have non-compliance, allergies, and multiple hospital admissions, investigations. Whereas in science, there is tenderness, superficial or non-anatomic, and dissection test is possible. Like when you're trying to do an SLR, patient has a lot of pain, but when you're looking somewhere else, patient is able to do active SLR freely. So till now, we have listened to the patient story, suspected a diagnosis, done a physical examination for verification and getting an anatomical level, and lower limb examination to see the vascular and locomotor status. So when and what to investigate? So Dr. Gautam, are you there?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. So how will
This
you
is
go ahead in
Mahesh.
this patient? Who will require investigations and who will require a direct conservative trial?
Patients with only mechanical type of back pain and acute onset of only back pain, I would like to give analgesics conservative trial in the form of rest without any investigations.
Okay.
If any patient is having back pain associated with radicular symptoms or any other neurological deficits or any other myelopathic type of signs, I would like to investigate with X-rays, MRI, and if needed, CT scan. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Anything else you want to add?
Yeah. So role of X-rays in usually low back pain or chronic low backs is usually unnecessary and not helpful. Only those cases like patients having red flags and no improvements, as Dr. Gautam said. So no improvement after 6 weeks of conservative treatment. Even guidelines of American College of Physicians says there is no need to obtaining imaging or other diagnostic tests in patients with non-specific back pain. And especially after 6 weeks if patient have a persistent sciatica pain. So see these MRIs. These 3 patients, one has disc degeneration, lumbar stenosis, and prolapses. All these 3 patients can have a severe back pain, and all these patients can be asymptomatic, could be an incidental MRI. So all the lesions on the MRI, are they symptomatic or those lesions to be treated? So at the age of 20 years of age, 10% of population have lesions on an MRI, which could be related to back pain, but these all patients are asymptomatic, which increases to 50% by 40 years of age and 90% by 60 years of age. A disc and joint pathology is noted in 100% of autopsies of person over the age of 50. And disc protrusion or herniation can be found in 30 to 50% of the population, even in absence of symptoms. So a diagnosis that is based on MRI in the absence of objective clinical findings may not be the cause of patient's pain, and an attempt at operative corrections could be the first step towards disaster. So these are the few examples. These are the cases either being treated conservatively where it was being to be over investigated and to be operated, or patients are over investigated thinking these are the fractures or tumors. So this first case example is patients having compression fracture in the lumbar spine treated conservatively, but they missed there was a bony fracture posteriorly going, which will definitely confirm it on an CT or an MRI, which will require a stabilization. This patient was treated conservative, later on developed kyphosis and neurological deficit. This young boy had an X-ray, had a limbus vertebra, which is non-union of the non-fusion of the epiphyseal plate, normal finding, but has been thinking about the fracture, has been investigated too much to have a fracture there. This third patient having intradural tumor on MRI, having chronic back pain, was treated for this intradural tumor, but had persistent back pain even after operated for the tumor. So incidental findings should not be treated. Patient it has found in on MRI. These 3 patients, again, patient has repeated X-rays for chronic back pains, having reported normal, taken conservative treatment for more than 6 months, and on MRI has found to have mets. I already discussed patient with cervical myelopathy and have a myelopathic features in the cervical spine, have a persistently normal specific low back pain because of muscle spasm, though having X-rays, lumbar spine, MRI completely normal. This recently one lady presented in our OPD with persistent back pain for 6 months of duration, tried all conservative treatment, got an MRI done, patient had a ACM with syringe. So there is a theory related to a syringe causing back pain because of the muscle imbalance, because of the unequal insertion. These are the other causes at the sacroiliac joints, which is easily missed. Early stage of sacroiliitis seen in ankylosing spondylitis, osteitis condensus ileae, especially in post-pregnancy females, they can have this kind of pain. And pedicle lysis, very rare or very difficult to detect actually. So vast variety of treatment options are there that denotes optimal approach is very unsure. So as we search on a Google for the low back pain treatment, about more than 100 million search will come in less than 1 second. So how to approach these patients? So what is the role of conservative treatment? Having 100 million options, what to choose, what not to choose from. A role of conservative treatment. Dr. Datta, are you there? Dr. Datta?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Can you just answer this, please? How you go ahead? What is the role of conservative treatment? What will be your opinion on that?
You can operate every patient come with back pain. So there is a definite role. So as you see, most of the patients come with acute back pain with radicularities, radicular pain, if you give the fair treatment of rest with analgesic, they settles down. Very few patients continues or progress with the neurological or other symptoms. You can treat mechanical back pain patient with a weak back muscle. You can train them with different physiotherapy or exercise that strengthen their core. So it supports their back, and it's it helps them to reduce their pain, which is a mechanical or something like. Yeah.
Okay. So is definitely in all patients of back pain you can operate, but definitely there is a criteria on whose patients we have to operate, or all who patients we have to continue the conservative treatment. There is no role of operative management. So what is the advice to stay? We already advise all the patients to stay active. There is no role of complete bed rest in these kind of patients. There is no evidence which supports staying active is harmful for either acute pain or sciatica. That means the patient keeps on thinking hurt causes harm. So this hurt does not equal to harm in these kind of patients. 1 or 2 days of absolute bed rest, if necessary, can be given. And usually I advise light activities, avoid heavy lifting, bending or twisting or walking in these patients. There's no data on particular exercises. I usually ask my patients to avoid bending at their back when they have a back pain, rather bend at their knees. Because as you bend forwards, there will be hyperextension of the spine because of contraction of the sacrospinalis, which can again overload the posterior facet joints and cause you pain. The other important thing what I tell patients is try to sit at a place where you don't go beyond 90 degrees of hip and knee flexions, like sitting on the sofas or sitting down on the floor. So what role of medication? NSAIDs, a study shows that there is not much difference of oral steroids compared to topical NSAIDs. Muscle relaxants, though role have an acute back pain, but there is no role in radiculopathy and chronic back pains. People usually use anticonvulsants, neuroleptics like gabapentin, pregabalin, and antidepressants like nortriptyline, triptyline. And oral and intramuscular steroids, though has a moderate clinical evidence for acute radiculopathy. Physical therapy like immobilization, but we already discussed the bed rest. Bracing, usually I advise in patient having acute back pain, but continuous or prolonged use of bracing can cause atrophy of the abdominal and the back muscles, which can further worsen the outcome in these patients. Tractions, some people do use tractions, but its use is completely not evidence-based, but is usually mainly used in patients who are not ready to do a bed rest. So traction helps them to immobilize, and 1 episode of traction is completely okay. There's no role of a repeat traction in these patients. Physical therapy is the most effective in patients with chronic low back pain, but there is no randomized trials for radiculopathy. Active lumbar stabilization exercises are better than passive exercises. These are some of the back exercises from abdomens and the back strengthening along with aerobics, yoga, and Pilates. So usually I advise my patients to start with gentle abdominal and back strengthening exercises, and after 2 to 3 months, they can slowly go on to aerobics, yoga, and Pilates. So what are the other treatment methodologies? The acupuncture, what its role is completely non-proven. Chiropractic manipulation, ozone, chemonucleasis have shown limited patients, limited results. Epidural steroids, there is not much proven benefit in chronic back pain patients, but patients with muscular pains, it has shown very good results. But who needs a surgical treatment? Dr. Nirav, will you like to comment on that part?
Yeah, so surgical treatment basically
for back pain.
Yeah, so most of the, as you have already discussed, most of the patients will belong to the mechanical part of the back pain. There are certain patients like patients who are presenting with like significant instability kind of back pain, patients who are having very difficulty in getting up from the bed. They have a morning instability catch. So first, these are those group of the patients. Second patient, acute lumbar disc herniation, fail to improve with conservative treatment. So they are the again another set of patients with, for which I would like to prefer surgery. Third patient, any patient presenting with the neurodeficit, any patient presenting with the bladder valve, that means the cardiac vena, acute cardiac vena syndrome patients are absolute surgical indication. And third patient, like a patient with the signs and symptoms of the MRI proven spondylolischitis, depending upon their severity, whether they will need a biopsy or stabilization procedure. And third, next, the last patient with the history of a spinal tumor like that. So those are the patients.
Okay, so rightly said. So patients who have failed conservative treatment or acute or progressive neurological deficits, patients having acute bladder or bowel involvement or considerable drop in quality of life, severe claudication, not able to walk outside the home or walking able to few steps, and they have to sit, are potential candidates which will benefit from surgical management. So only emergency in these patients of chronic acute back pains are the cauda equina syndrome. It is acute compression of cauda equina which may present with lower limb weakness and urinary retention, and on examination they have a settle anesthesia or numbness. It is a surgical emergency to be addressed within 8 hours or max 48 hours, beyond which recovery is unlikely. But post-surgery requires rehabilitations like urodynamics and bladder exercises, and incontinence is the last things to improve it, if it at all. So how the safety of spine surgery has come over the last 10 to 15 years. Use of microscopes make it much easier to operate, though it is more surgeon dependent. Use of O-arm and aerocity navigation, which has reduced the stress of surgeons on putting the instrumentation in the spine, which has made it more easier. The use of robotic surgeries. It is not a complete robotic till now in spine surgery. It is more surgery with a CT navigation. And role of neuromonitoring is definitely intraoperative, help us to notice where the nerve function is deteriorating, where the signals are deteriorating. We have to stop or redo at the same procedures. So what is the prevention of low back pain? So as everybody knows, is to stay fit, core strength, maintain proper weight, avoid smoking, proper nutrition, posture awareness, lifting mechanics. So what is the conclusion of this topic is low back pain is very common, and imaging is not acutely necessary in all the patients. Mostly it is self-limited or does not equal to harm, and treatment should be focused on reassurance, pain control, rapid return to activity, and vigilant about the red and yellow flags. And some patients can require operative intervention in selective cases. Thank you. So we are open for discussion if any questions are there. Mr. Bhimendra?
Among the attendees, anyone want to ask any question? So I like to ask one question with you, Dr. Bagga. So like for any patient presenting with acute lumbar disc herniation, so like how long you want to wait before going for a surgical procedure? Or is there any way in between the surgery and the conservative trial?
So there is no exact time limit where we suggest patients require surgery. It is the studies have shown patient even with lumbar canal stenosis or even patient having radicular pains without neurological deficits, the duration of symptoms does not determine the outcome of the surgery. If these patients have been done surgery after 6 months or 6 years, the results are same. But it all depends on the quality of life of the patient. If the patient is so much disabled, he's not able to walk few steps, he's avoiding social meetings just because of pain, not able to stand for a long. In all these patients, surgery is an option to give them a better quality of life.
Yeah. Thank you.
In acute disc, he's asking acute disc, how much bed rest will you give?
Yeah, usually we advise for maximum 1 to 2 days of absolute bed rest once the acute pain episode, and we ask the patient to gently start their activities, avoid sitting for a longer time, rather have a walk around and then lie on the bed, do their routine, going to the washroom and have their food, and then again go back to bed for at least 3 to 4 weeks. And after 3 to 4 weeks, usually they say 90% of the patients after 3 to 4 weeks have a significant 90% relief. And very rarely patients with herniated disc pulposus require intervention in the form of epidural steroids and surgery, unless until there is a neurological deficit.
And one more question asked was like, is there any treatment option in between bed rest and surgery?
So obviously you can bed rest and surgery. You can give an option of epidural steroid. Patient doesn't have a neurological deficit. You can give an option of epidural steroids. Yes, it acts in substantial group of patient. More than 80% of the patient will respond to epidural steroid. So it can be a thing in between the bed rest and surgery. Help patient avoid surgery sometimes.
Yeah.
After bed rest?
After
What is
one
the- if-
bed rest,
if the-
patient has been allowed for the gradual increase in their activity level, routine activities for a month. So
activities modification? Is there any role of activities and postural
activity modification, as I rightly said, I advise patients not to sit for a longer time. I ask them and rest on bed. Avoid bending or lifting anything heavy. Even if they want to bend at an emergency, bend at their knees rather than bend. There is one question from Dr. Vimal Kumar Garg, is what is the management of osteomalacia? Dr. Rakesh, would you like to take this question? Rakesh? I think he's not there. Okay, Dr. Gautam, will you take that question?
Osteomalacia, I would like to symptomatic patient have generalized back pain and multiple musculoskeletal pain, presents with musculoskeletal pain, and I would like to investigate first in the form of serum vitamin D3 level before starting any medicines. And once the vitamin D3 level is normal, I will not start any major loading doses or something like that. If the patient is insufficient, I will give 60,000 international unit weekly for 12 weeks. Then I will switch over to maintenance dose monthly once. If the patient is like deficient, like less than 10, I will give a injectable in the form of 6 lakh international unit stat, and then weekly for 12 weeks, then switch over to monthly doses. Then I will ask the patient to come back after 1 month to ask for any improvement, or I would like to investigate for any other.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, Dr. Rakesh, yes. Dr. Rakesh, I have one question for you. So as you are practicing in UK, so is there any protocols for conservative treatment in these kind of patients? How you approach these patients of low back pain there in UK?
So if these patients are usually elderly, wherein their age is around mostly more than 60, but there might be younger patients as well who are still osteopenic or osteoporotic. So one very important thing that we first do is to investigate the cause. Like if a young female, like a female in her 50s has had hysterectomy at early age for whatever reason, that can still contribute to improper bone mineralization and metabolism leading to osteopenia or osteoporosis. So, or if a patient is on steroids for long term, that can also result in osteoporosis. So investigating the cause in all these patients is very important. And unless you treat the cause or unless you do something about it, you're not going to cure the osteoporosis. So that needs to be investigated. And these patients, and standing upright X-ray is very important for back pain to see if there is any insufficiency fractures. And so if they are in acute agony because of the fracture or the pain and they're not responding to conservative management, we usually give them for 2 to 3 weeks. And if that is compromising their mobilization, and if they're in bed rest for a long time, they might end up compromising their chest, develop chest infection, and then land up in ICU and probably go south and die. So to prevent this, it is very important to get them up and about. So if there is a cause of pain, and if you do an MRI and it shows an acute fracture with stir signal, treating them with vertebroplasty can something beneficial, and you can get them mobilizing. And then you can, as Dr. Gautam said, vitamin D supplementation and all that can also be added to the rest of management.
Yes, I would just like to add one thing to it. Like, there's a new terminology which is coming up nowadays is sarcopenia, which includes all this musculoskeletal, both osteoporosis and muscle weakness. As a sarcopenia, there is a diagnostic criteria for sarcopenia. There is MRI-related fat infiltration in the psoas muscles, which can take as a criteria. The second is the arm grip strength ratio, and third is the patient, how the patient is able to walk from a sitting position and getting up. So all these criteria can be used to assess sarcopenia, and new scores are coming up recently to know preoperatively risk of surgery in these kind of patients, who all patients will require frequent readmissions, or who all patients are landing up in ICU or a longer hospital stays. So osteoporosis management, they have definitely, Dr. Rakesh and Gautam, very much into the detail how to go about. I also think muscle weakness, the elderly age group with osteopenia and along with muscle weakness to be addressed simultaneously along with bone weakness.
Sarcopenia due to osteoporosis. That's a...
Yeah, so both go hand in hand.
Yeah, Rajdeep, I want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, a patient with the psychological non-specific pain involving multiple joints require multiple admissions, but there's no definite cause. So, do you believe there is a role for like antidepressant or something like that in such cases? Low dose?
Yes, definitely. Means like I personally feel 70% of the patient have some psychological component of causing them back pain, persistent back pain. And using nortriptyline and triptyline in these patients in the night time, which can cause sedation along with, which are mood elevators also. So these patients definitely get a lot of benefits giving these medicines for at least 4 to 6 weeks of time that can give. And I usually use low dose of nortriptyline or triptyline, around 20 milligrams to 10 milligrams of nortriptyline, triptyline in these patients. Quite routinely, along with the neuroleptics like gabapentin or pregabalin. These patients. Especially females are typical, means like if you see more patients, females are the major group of population where I use antidepressants more commonly than the male patients.
Yeah. And main thing to it,
it's always all diagnosis of exclusion.
So I like to add one thing in conservative management in acute disease. Like sometimes patients come with a history. He was on toilet seats training for the stools. Then he suddenly have a pain which is like there for some time. So in such cases, I like to add stool softener to the patient. As to the like it complementary to the like the daily lifestyle adjustment on.
Yes, lifestyle modification is like a very important factor nowadays.
Constipation is one of the cause for low back pain, discogenic. Repeated straining, increase in abdominal pressure.
Yeah, I have a patient who has been continuously misusing opioids. He is taking that bhang ki goli continuously, daily night he used to take. But he has developed chronic low back pain, loss of libido, chronic constipations and hemorrhoids and everything. So just stopping the drugs, starting some, stopping the opioids along with some laxatives and everything, along with some back exercises have helped him a lot.
So, Dr. Rajdeep, I have one question. Do you advise like low backache with radicular pain? Do you advise EMG NCV? Does it have any role, like particular to diagnose or to document?
What I didn't get your question, please.
EMG NCV.
Yeah.
No conduction study.
No conduction studies.
Yeah. So what is the role in these back pain patients?
Yeah, to like particularly localize the cause or document the nerve.
I usually don't routinely do EMG NCV in these patients. Once you have already patient has a typical symptoms and you can relate it to one single nerve root or a dermatome or a myotome, I usually don't do EMG NCV for documentations. Only those patients who have a proximal myopathy or peripheral nerve root lesions, which is not corroborating with the MRI, but still patient has weakness, like patients that come with ulnar nerve palsy or post leprosy ulnar nerve hypertrophy and has a mild cervical disc. So these patients kind of getting referred to us for radicular pain and they have been advised surgery from the outside. But on examination, patient has thickening of the ulnar nerves and only ulnar nerve palsy, typical ulnar nerve hand weakness, intrinsic muscle weakness is there. So all these patients will require EMG NCV rather than typical patients having a root level symptoms, sensory and motor symptoms at a root level, which is corroborating with the MRI. Usually don't do it for documentations. So one question has come up. What is osteoporosis? How to diagnose in patients in osteoporosis. So, Dr. Datta, would you like to take the call? Dr. Nirav, are you there? Nirav? He's not
Hello.
there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Nirav, are there? Will you take that?
Yeah. So
How to
like
diagnose osteoporosis?
So first thing is the osteoporosis. So as the most of the our spine patients are in elderly age group. So everyone patient coming with this first is the clinical presentation. Any patient more than 60 years old with a rounded kyphotic back, rounded kyphosis, and patient usually will complain of they are losing their height. So that is one of the signs that you can look at. Okay, the patient is suffering from osteoporosis on the clinical basis. Second, most common presentation, these patients will have acute chronic back pain. Okay, they might have some sort of acute exacerbation, which may or may not be related to trivial trauma. So, as for the diagnosis point of view, so we need to do some blood investigation as well as we have to get a DEXA scan. So, DEXA scan, on the DEXA scan, the T score value, the T score less than -2.5 is a definitive diagnosis for osteoporosis. Right. So it is, and along with that, the blood investigation in the form of the serum calcium, vitamin D levels, serum albumin levels, serum creatinine levels, as well as the most important is ALP and PTS levels. We have to diagnose all together because any form of the osteoporosis will require a treatment in the form of the medical management. And how to decide which medical management, because there are the variety of the medical management in the form of the bisphosphonates. Second one right now commonly used is a teriparatide, that's a recombinant parathormone, and the third one, recent onset, we are starting using denosumab.
Right.
So depending on the severity of the osteoporosis T score values, we can titrate upon along with the patient financial status. So those things we have to decide. And the third most important thing is the serum lab values. If the patient is known case of CKD, so it's better to, with the severe osteoporosis, better to go start with the denosumab, not to go with the parathormone.
Right.
So because these parathormone can be associated with can raise the creatinine levels in these CKD patients. So depending on the dosing pattern, the denosumab needs to be given at least 6 monthly for at least 6 to 8 injections. That's been recommended dose. And the parathormone, the most important thing, we have to counsel the patient. The injection should not be stopped for not before at least 18 to 24 months. So it has to be taken at a subcutaneous dose, 20 micrograms subcutaneously. So otherwise, we have to counsel the patient for some relatively cheaper options like oral bisphosphonates, added with the calcium and vitamin D.
So any particular advice you give to the patients, means whom all patients you go for bisphosphonate other than the cost factors? Is there any criteria at this much T score? I will start with bisphosphonates. In this much T score, I'll give PT.
Yeah. So depending on the T score, if it is between -1 to between -2.5, so I can go with the oral bisphosphonates with supplemented calcium and vitamin D. But if it is T score even less than -2.5, I'll prefer to start with parathormone.
Yeah. So is there any relation when we plan to operate these kind of patients? Any particular patient has osteoporosis and we plan surgery in these patients. So do you have a choice of drugs in these patients? Even a patient has a -2.4 T score and you want plan for surgeries and we are planning for fusion surgery. So still you plan for bisphosphonates or you will plan for teriparatide?
In those cases, patient with such a severe osteoporosis, I'm planning for fusion procedure. So it is very important to have a solid fusion. The bone mass has to be, the bone mineral density has to be really good. Otherwise, the chances of failure is very high. In those cases, I like to prefer parathormone, or it may or may not be with the combination with bisphosphonates, because there has been studies which have shown that the combination effect of the bisphosphonates with parathormone or parathormone with denosumab gives a greater value of improvement of bone mass density. So in those cases, bisphosphonates alone is not preferable.
Okay, that's good. Any more questions anybody has? As we already discussed, the low back pain is the most common thing you'll come across in your OPD, in orthopedic or general physician OPD. And still, all these patients, majority have to be treated conservatively, either with medicines or some physical therapies. Be aware of the red flags and the yellow flags. And very rare group of patients will require surgery who have a poor quality of life because of back pain, or patients who will get benefit out of the surgery. They are the only patients who should undergo surgery. Rest, all of the back pain patients should be treated conservatively. And thank you all, Dr. Rakesh from UK, Dr. Rudatta, he's practicing as spine consultant in Mumbai, Dr. Gautam in Madurai, Dr. Neerav in Coimbatore. All are like big spine surgeons there. So thank you all for supporting this session and